When you're drafting an NBA player with the #1 overall pick, you're expecting greatness, and sometimes you get it. Other times, you're going to get players like Ben Simmons and Anthony Bennett. Today, we're going to go over what exactly happened to every #1 draft pick from 2010 to 2019. John Wall was the consensus first overall pick of the 2010 NBA draft. He had an incredible season at Kentucky before declaring for the draft, and in his freshman year, Wall lit up the NCAA, averaging 16.6 points and 6.5 assists per game. He would be named to the NCAA All-Region Team, a consensus All-American, the SEC Player of the Year, the SEC Rookie of the Year, and the winner of the Rupp Trophy given to the top player in all of college basketball. Coming into the draft, scouts were extremely high on Wall. His out-of-this-world speed and athleticism made him a clear choice for the first overall pick. Wall was almost impossible to stop around the rim and extremely difficult for opposing defenders to keep up with. Despite all the positive that scouts saw in his game, they were a bit worried about how his jump shot would translate at the NBA level. Leading up to the draft, he would draw player comps to Derrick Rose and Russell Westbrook. Wall continued playing for the Wizards through his first 10 seasons in the NBA. With Washington, he would go through some highs and some lows. At his peak, he was one of the best point guards that the league had to offer. He was an incredible finisher around the rim, and his athleticism gave him the ability to pull off 360 layups and some violent dunks. But towards the tail end of his time with the Wizards, Wall would go through a very tough string of injuries that would leave him as a shell of the player that he used to be. After missing the 2019-20 seasons due to injuries, Wall would be traded to the Houston Rockets. The deal would send Wall to the Rockets along with a first-round pick, while the Wizards would receive Russell Westbrook in return. Despite being on Houston's roster for 2 years, Wall would only play in 40 games. Houston was going through a rebuilding phase at this time, and as a result of this, Wall was a very odd fit on the roster. With him being a veteran looking to play for a contending team that he could win a championship with, Wall would end up sitting out the entire 2021-22 season in hopes that the Rockets would trade him. Eventually, Houston would buy out Wall's contract and he would sign with the Los Angeles Clippers. In his single season with the Clippers, Wall was far from the player that he was during his prime with the Wizards. Los Angeles attempted to use him as a backup point guard to give the team a scoring boost off the bench, but Wall was extremely inefficient. As a result of this, the Clippers would deal him back to the Rockets in a 3-team deal. The trade sent Wall to the Rockets, Luke Kennard from the Clippers to the Grizzlies, and Los Angeles would receive 3 second-round picks. After going unsigned through the remainder of the 22-23 season, there is a chance that Wall's playing days have come to an end, but he still put together a very solid career. He was a 5-time All-Star and a member of the 2016-17 All-NBA team. If it wasn't for injuries, Wall likely could have gone on to be a very solid piece on a championship caliber team. Up next is one of the most polarizing players of the current era. Coming into the draft, Kyrie Irving was not a consensus top pick by any means. There was a lot of speculation around him after only playing 11 games in his sole season at Duke. Irving had suffered an injury that kept him sidelined for the majority of his collegiate career. In the little bit of time that he was able to play, he averaged 17.5 points and 4.3 assists per game. Scouts were very high about his handles, body control, finishing ability around the rim, and his passing game. While Irving isn't really known as a distributor, more of a scorer in today's game, in college, he was one of the top dime droppers in all of basketball. Scouts compared him to Mike Conley and Chris Paul leading up to the draft. The biggest concern surrounding Kyrie was his ability to remain on the court. Suffering such a serious injury so early in his collegiate career was a massive red flag for many scouts, but the Cleveland Cavs took a risk on him and selected him with the first overall pick in the 2011 NBA draft. This move would definitely end up paying off, as Irving was an integral part of the 2016 finals team that landed the Cavs their only championship in franchise history. But only 2 years after winning it all, he would end up being dealt to the Boston Celtics for Isaiah Thomas, Jay Crowder, a first-round pick, and Ante Zizic. This move allowed Irving to be the top option on a championship contending team, and he was finally out of LeBron James's shadow. But his stint in Boston would be short-lived. In the 2019 offseason, Irving would shock the league and join Kevin Durant in signing with the Brooklyn Nets. Many believed that this duo would go on to take over the league and be impossible to stop. But in the 3.5 years that Irving would spend with the Nets, the team would fail to make a finals appearance. Shortly after a controversial post that would lead Irving to being suspended, he would be traded to the Dallas Mavericks. The deal would send Irving to Dallas, and in return, the Nets received Spencer Dinwiddie, Dorian Finney-Smith, 1 first-round pick, and 2 second-round picks. When he's available, Irving is still one of the greatest point guards in the league. He is an elite scorer and arguably has the best handles in all of NBA history. With him entering free agency this offseason, there is a chance that he could join a contending team to make a few more runs at a title before his career comes to an end. Up to this point, Irving has been named an 8-time All-Star and won a championship as a member of the Cleveland Cavaliers. The next player on this list developed into one of the best big men in the NBA and is arguably the best #1 overall pick of the 2010s. Anthony Davis was a no-brainer to be the top pick in the 2012 NBA draft. In his single season with the Kentucky Wildcats, Davis averaged 14.2 points, 10.4 rebounds, and a mind-blowing 4.7 blocks per game. Along with this, he would lead his team to win an NCAA title. Coming into the draft, scouts were in love with his defensive abilities. Davis was able to guard any position in college and was one of the top shot blockers in the history of college basketball. Along with this, Davis's ability to stretch the floor and finish around the rim made him very difficult to defend. The only gripe that scouts had with him was his lack of strength, which many feared would lead to injuries throughout his career. He was compared to players like Kevin Garnett and Marcus Camby. After being selected by the New Orleans Hornets with the top pick, Davis would quickly take over the league. He made his first All-Star appearance in only his second year in the league, and outside of Chris Paul, is the best player in franchise history. But after being unable to make a deep playoff run with the team, Davis would force a trade to the Los Angeles Lakers. The blockbuster deal sent Lonzo Ball, Brandon Ingram, Josh Hart, and 3 first-round picks to the Pelicans in return for Davis. While the Lakers gave up a king's ransom to add AD to their team, it was well worth it. Davis played a key role in the Lakers winning the NBA Finals in 2020. At only 30 years old, Davis still has a lot in the tank. He is one of the best interior defenders in the league and has proved that he is still capable of the incredible 40-point and 20-rebound performances here and then. At this point in his career, he has made 8 All-Star teams and has led the NBA in blocks 3 times. Up next is arguably the biggest bust on this list. While the Cleveland Cavaliers knocked out their top pick in 2011 when they selected Kyrie Irving, the same cannot be said about their 2013 pick. Anthony Bennett was a high-flying wing out of UNLV. He was named the Rookie of the Year in the Mountain West Conference and averaged 16.1 points and 8.1 rebounds per game. Scouts projected him to be picked around the middle of the lottery, and it came as a shock when the Cavs took him #1 overall. Despite this, there was a lot of love from Bennett's college tape. He had an ideal build for this position, shot very efficiently, and was almost unguardable around the rim. Scouts were just a little bit worried about how he would transition into the league though. He was a bit too small to play the power forward position, but too slow to play on the wing. He was compared to Rodney Rogers and Jason Maxiell coming into the draft. Bennett's NBA career would only last 4 seasons and he would play for a new team every single year. Over those 4 years in the league, he would start in 4 games, and it was clear that the Cavs missed on this pick. But he was used as a trade piece in the deal that would land the team Kevin Love. Bennett would end his NBA career averaging 4.4 points and 3.1 rebounds per game. This next player on the list was compared to Michael Jordan. Coming into the draft, the hype for Andrew Wiggins was out of this world. He averaged 17.1 points and 5.9 rebounds in his single season at Kansas. The pure physical gifts that Wiggins had heading into the NBA draft had scouts drooling. Along with his athleticism, scouts were in love with his defensive abilities and selfless attitude. The biggest hangup that many had was that they believed that he didn't have enough passion for the game to truly be an all-time great though. The Cavs would select him with the top overall pick, but they would quickly deal him to the Minnesota Timberwolves for Kevin Love. Wiggins would go on to be a very solid player with Minnesota, but he would end up falling short of the hype that surrounded him coming into the league. Despite this, he has still proven to be an incredible role player for the Golden State Warriors and was an integral part of the team making a title run in the 2022 season. While not being the star player that many believe that he would be, Wiggins is still an elite 3-and-D player and someone that any contending team would love to have on their roster. Up next is a player that Wiggins would spend the first 4.5 years of his career playing alongside. Karl Anthony Towns is one of the most unique centers that the league has ever seen. He entered the league at just the right time for the beginning of the three-point revolution. Scouts were in love with his shooting form and work ethic, but they were a bit worried about his post-game on the offensive end. Coming into the draft, he was compared to players like Andrew Bogut and Vlade Divac. When the Minnesota Timberwolves took him with the top overall pick, many believed they would be the team of the future with Towns and Wiggins as the team's leaders. Towns has gone on to be a franchise player for the Timberwolves so far. While the team really hasn't seen much postseason success since he joined the team, Towns has still ascended to be one of the most versatile big men in the league. So far, he's been named to 3 All-Star games and was named to the All-NBA team twice. What if I told you our next player would go from being compared to LeBron James and Magic Johnson to being declared a bust? Coming into the NBA, Ben Simmons was thought to be the next LeBron James. He averaged an incredible 19.2 points, 11.8 rebounds, and 4.8 assists per game in his single season at LSU. Scouts were absolutely in love with almost every facet of his game. He was a player that could do it all on both ends of the floor. The main concern that they had was his inability to shoot from outside, but it was thought at the time that he would develop a shot once he joined the league. The 76ers made the pick and took him at number 1 overall, and it was thought to be a no-brainer at the time. He would end up missing the entirety of his rookie season due to an injury, but after getting his feet wet, Simmons would go on to be an incredible point guard that opposing teams struggled to stop. He would end up making 3 consecutive All-Star appearances and put up very solid stats as the 76ers starting point guard. But after a back injury that kept him sidelined through the 2021-22 season, Simmons has not been the same player since. In his return to action with the Brooklyn Nets, Simmons has been a shell of himself and is now thought to be a potential bust with one of the worst contracts in the NBA. He is set to turn 27 years old next season and still of course has more than enough time to turn things around, but things are trending in a very bad direction for him. Up next is another player drafted by the 76ers that would fail to live up to the hype due to injuries. Markelle Fultz was one of the most entertaining players in college basketball in his single season at Washington. He had a unique combination of size and athleticism that paired with his explosiveness around the rim and elite outside shot that made him a perfect candidate to be the top selection in the 2017 NBA draft. Everyone around the league was in love with his game, and the only worries coming into the draft was his ability to lead the team and his carelessness with the ball at certain times. Coming into the league, he was compared to D'Angelo Russell and James Harden. But just like many of the 76ers lottery picks around this time, injuries would end up taking a massive toll on Fultz. He suffered a shoulder injury before he even suited up for his first regular season game that would permanently stunt his shooting form. Fultz would end up being traded from the 76ers after only 2 disappointing seasons with the team. And while it took some time to get things going in Orlando after 2 injury-ridden seasons, Fultz would have a very promising year in the 22-23 season. With him only being set to turn 25 years old next year, there is still plenty of time for him to turn his career around. While he's not too likely to become an all-star caliber player within the next couple of years, he is still a very talented starting player that could go on to have a very lengthy career. The next player on our list was compared to some of the best big men of all time. After a very successful season at Arizona, DeAndre Ayton was thought to have the potential of being a generational center. Scouts compared him to players like Shawn Kemp and David Robinson. In college, he was an elite rim defender and rebounder with an elite post game. When he was selected with the first overall pick by the Phoenix Suns, many believed that he and Devin Booker would be the second rendition of Shaq and Kobe. But up to this point, Ayton has fallen well short of his expectations. When a player comes into the league expected to be one of the best to ever play a position, it's very easy for them to not live up to the hype while still having a very successful career. Thus far, that has been the case for Ayton. He is a very talented center, but his effort and ability on the defensive end has really held him back. While he was a key contributor to the Suns this season, it would not be surprising at all if the team moves on from him in the current offseason. Honestly, a change of scenery could be exactly what Ayton needs. He is an all-star caliber player if he can find a roster that will give him enough touches. The final first overall pick of the 2010s is another player who drew comparisons to LeBron James. In college and heading into the draft, Zion Williamson was one of the most hyped up prospects of all time. He was a unique combination of size, strength, and athleticism that the game had not seen since Charles Barkley. Scouts were head over heels for his inside game and his shot blocking abilities. Despite his size, Williamson has mind-blowing bounce that allows him to be one of the most electric dunkers in the league. Thus far, he has not gotten too much of a chance to put his abilities on display though. Through the first 3 seasons in the league, injuries have kept him sidelined for more games than he's played in. But when he's on the floor, Zion is incredible. He is an extremely efficient scorer and an elite defender. When he's playing, he elevates the Pelicans to being one of the top teams in the league. If he's able to make it through the entirety of the 2023-24 season, New Orleans has a real shot at least making the playoffs, if not making a deeper run. And if he stays healthy, who knows, Zion could even win MVP one of these years.